Is the killing of Hassan Nasrallah a game changer? It's the culmination of a massive series of Israeli attacks on Hezbollah's top political and military leadership. How will the group respond, and could events in the Middle East spin out of control? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. He led Hezbollah for more than 3 decades and made it into a military and political force to be reckoned with in the long-running conflict in the Middle East. Hassan Nasrallah's killing in a massive Israeli air attack in southern suburb of Beirut is sure to open a new page in the ongoing war. Israel is on high alert and says it's prepared for all options after it announced his death. But will Hezbollah respond? And if so, how? And how will the latest development shape the future of the armed group and its role in the region? We'll go to our guests in a moment. First, this report from Kulthum Sharif.
Hours after a massive air attack on Lebanon's capital, the Israeli military says it's killed a man who led Hezbollah for more than 3 decades. It made the announcement in a social media post. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant praised the military operation, calling it one of the most important targeted strikes since the founding of the State of Israel.
The State of Israel has eliminated Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. He was the murderer of thousands of Israelis and foreign citizens. To our enemies, I say, we are strong and determined. To our partners, I would say, our war is your war. And to the people of Lebanon, I say, our war is not with you. It's time for change.
Israel's Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Levy, says the strikes on Beirut were long planned and were executed at the right time. And he's warned of more attacks.
This is not the end of the toolbox. It should be very clear. There are more tools we can use ahead. The message is a simple one. Whoever threatens the citizens of the State of Israel, we will know how to get there. In the north, in the south, even in the most distant places.
The Israeli military says it's eliminated most senior Hezbollah leaders during weeks of escalating violence in Lebanon. The death of Nasrallah, who made Hezbollah a regional force, is seen as a major blow to the Iran-backed group. His supporters are mourning his death.
If they kill Hassan Nasrallah, 1,000 Hassan Nasrallahs will come. At the end, it is a matter of principle. The Palestinians won't give up their land, so I don't think Hassan Nasrallah's assassination will impact the cause, whether in Lebanon or Palestine.
The strikes on Beirut were the heaviest in a near 1-year conflict with Hezbollah and believed to have been carried out using ground-penetrating munitions known as bunker-buster bombs. They reduced several apartment blocks in a southern Beirut suburb to rubble. The attacks came shortly after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a defiant speech at the United Nations General Assembly, where he told world leaders there'll be no let-up in the attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza.
As long as Hezbollah chooses the path of war, Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right to remove this threat and return our citizens to their homes safely. And that's exactly what we're doing.
In a speech boycotted by several diplomats who staged a walkout, Netanyahu also threatened Iran and called on the UN Security Council to stop Tehran from getting nuclear weapons.
I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East.
Israel has pounded Lebanon since Monday with attacks that have killed hundreds of people and injured thousands. But the two sides have traded near-daily strikes since last October, after Israel began its war on Gaza that's killed more than 41,000 Palestinians. As Israel continues its attacks on Lebanon and Gaza, many analysts say the conflict has already become a regional war. Kulthum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guest from Athens, Nicholas No, Editor-in-Chief of MideastWire.com, based in Beirut. From San Francisco, Stephen Zunes, Professor of Politics and Founding Chair of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco. From Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy, columnist with the Haaretz newspaper and author of the book The Punishment of Gaza. Thank you for joining us. Nicholas, are we talking about a turning point in the Middle East, in Lebanon in particular, after the killing of Hassan Nasrallah?
Well, this word turning point has been used repeatedly over the last almost 12 months, certainly since October 7th, since October 8th, when Hezbollah became committed to being a part of this conflict. I think this is probably the most significant point that we could say represents a very likelihood or high likelihood of a major escalation that we've seen in the last 11 and a half, 12 months. So to your question, yes, this is a significant blow to Hezbollah. The accumulated blows of the last 8 weeks have been particularly painful for the group, the hardest strikes it's ever endured since it was founded in the wake of the Israeli invasion of 1982. And they are undoubtedly right now struggling to try to reconvene, reorganize, and assert their next steps, including with their ally Iran and other allies around the Middle East. And this is, I think, what we're waiting for. I think there's a high likelihood that Hezbollah is willing, capable, and organized to respond to the events of the last 24 hours in a very strong way. And I think that, unfortunately, that means we're in a likely scenario of an even worse level of warfare and escalation than we've even seen over the last almost 12 months since October 7th.
Stephen, by killing someone widely perceived to be irreplaceable in the chain of command of Hezbollah, were the Israelis hoping to do so for a particular reason, which is basically to ensure that Hezbollah's military and political capabilities will be eroded for many, many years to come?
Well, obviously, the goal is to try to weaken Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is a broad-based movement. In fact, they emerged out of Lebanese politics because the traditional parties, even Amal, the traditional Shia party, were the kind of top-down, elite-driven sectarian politics we'd seen since Lebanon's founding. And this was a populist movement that seemed to get a lot of support, even among Lebanese who did not support their, frankly, rather reactionary political and theological orientation. And so, there is much more to Hezbollah than simply Nasrallah and some of the other leaders. But the fact is, though, that he was very important. I mean, he'd been at the helm for 32 years, and he'd been a target for many years. In fact, a lot of people forget that the United States tried to assassinate Nasrallah back in 1984 with a bomb placed at a mosque that killed over 70 civilians, and Nasrallah escaped unharmed. So he has created a lot of enemies elsewhere, and including within Lebanon, and it's presumably with some infiltration of Lebanese that the Israelis were able to track him down. So again, he's had a lot of enemies. He's survived miraculously, and it's amazing he survived as long as he has. But I still believe that there's going to be enough of Hezbollah, both in terms of their military capabilities, but also their popular support, aided, of course, by the Iranian support that will continue to be a formidable force for the foreseeable future.
Gideon, was October the 7th the main reason why the Israelis decided to change the political and military calculus? Because in the past they were very cautious about targeting senior member of Hezbollah, particularly Hassan Nasrallah, fearing a backlash. Yesterday, they decided to kill him. What has changed?
The 7th of October, as you rightly said, Hisham, but they assassinated already one leader of Hezbollah many years ago. And I'm not sure they were so cautious, but obviously Israelis and their leaders feel that after the 7th of October, Israel has the right to do whatever it wants. You could see it in Gaza. Gaza was the most aggressive attack on Gaza, the war in Gaza, ever since Israel exists. Israel was never so aggressive in Gaza like it was in the last 12 months. This is because Israel feels that it has the right and the capability to do so after the 7th of October. In general, Israelis believe that the 7th of October allows them to do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. As for the assassination of Nasrallah, let's remember that Israel never stopped assassinating commanders and leaders, top leaders, and by the way, it never got any results.
Okay, Nicholas, you said that you think the structure is almost intact and that the backlash is just a matter of time. But when you look at the level of intelligence penetration over the last few weeks, as far as Hezbollah is concerned, this leaves many to ask the question whether Hezbollah will ever be the same again.
No, I certainly don't think that, the top leadership of Hezbollah is intact. Obviously, they are not. The Israelis have done an incredible job of eliminating a wide number of figures, including, of course, most notably Hassan Nasrallah. This is a big question that is very much open right now, and it is very hard for any of us to pronounce with open source data the extent to which Israeli strikes over the past few weeks, and indeed the past 11 months, have actually materially hurt Hezbollah's communication networks, their organizational capacity, and also their military capabilities. That is a very much an open question. I am, however, saying that my belief, having looked at this group for 20 years, is that although the decapitation of key leaders is a huge blow, this is an organization that has excelled in creating a deep and survivable set of units and organizational structure. They have been through enormous conflicts and wars, most notably in Syria and elsewhere with ISIS, etc., over the past 15 years. And it has developed capabilities and an organization that is extensive and that is deep. It is very tough for any of us to say to the degree that that has been stymied or penetrated or reduced. I think that we'll see in the coming hours and days the extent to which the Israelis have or have not degraded Hezbollah's military capabilities. Today, for example, there are numerous rocket strikes on Israel, including farther and deeper into Israel. I suspect, and I think it's likely, that we are going to see the continuation of Hezbollah's capabilities, and that they will, the leaders that are now taking over and the second generational leaders that are coming into place, that they are very much going to continue Hassan Nasrallah's original policy, which was no disengagement with Israel until there is a durable ceasefire in Gaza. And I think that that's what they are going to continue on to do. And that's why, and I think, Gideon Levy can speak to this more than I can, but given the unlikelihood of a ceasefire in Gaza under this Israeli leadership, I think that we are set for far worse conflict.
Stephen, are we likely to see more escalation on the region, or do you think that the Iranians will try to do their best to push for de-escalation to try to contain the impact of what is happening in Lebanon?
I'm afraid I have to agree with the previous guest that indeed there will indeed be some escalation. I mean, Hezbollah has held back. They have a huge arsenal, far beyond what Hamas has. Their relations with Iran are far closer, far more support. We saw what happened in 2006, where they were able to strike just about anywhere in Israel with many hundreds of both military and civilian casualties. And they've held back so far to unleash these things. Now, you've heard how Israel, of course, has the Iron Dome, much better anti-missile capabilities, but they can shoot down individual rockets and missiles. But despite this much vaunted U.S. Inspired system, it cannot survive a swarm attack, which Hezbollah is capable of. I mean, I think they held back in part because they didn't want Israel to inflict even more devastation on Lebanon, but clearly, Israel is quite willing to do that anyway. So I'm afraid just a matter of time before we do see a rather dramatic escalation.
Gideon, one of the top Iranian officials, Ibrahim Azizi, who is the leader of the Supreme National Security Council, said that Israel, quote, has opened the gates of all hell against itself. But now when you look at where the Iranians stand, if they decide not to act, that could just further exacerbate the frustration among many of their own people and the supporters of Hezbollah. But if they decide to react, where does it going to leave the region, and Israel in particular?
If they are going to react, and if Hezbollah has the capabilities that both the other guests just mentioned, then we are facing horrible days, because then it turns into a regional war with very few limits, with very little influence of the international community to stop it, for sure not in the first stages. It means a bloodbath also in Israel, and I'm not sure that Israel can really stand it. Israel is more fragile in terms of victims if it comes to the center, to the heart of the country. And Israel is, after one quite complicated year, people are quite exhausted. And above all, people have no clue where are we aiming to? What is the end game? I mean, I'm just asking, why did we start it if we don't have the end game? But other people who supported those two wars, there will be a certain stage when they will start to pay a personal price. They will start to ask themselves, what for? What would Israel gain? Because nobody can claim that those two wars were unpreventable. They could have been prevented, or at least there could have been an attempt to prevent them, because both Gaza and Beirut said ceasefire in Gaza puts an end to them. But Israel said no.
Okay. Nicholas, one of the key figures likely to succeed Hassan Nasrallah is Hashem Safieddin. He's his cousin. He has strong ties with the Iranians. What do you think will be the biggest challenge facing him in the near future? Is it reorganizing the structure of the group, or trying to build bridges with the different political factions in Lebanon, where the general consensus there is people don't want to see more wars and conflicts in the region?
Well, it's unclear whether or not he will succeed to the Secretary Generalship. I'd also caution all viewers and all of us to be extremely cautious about any biographical details and supposed readings into various figures. We're in the middle of a war, and there's also a media war going on alongside it, and there has been for quite some time. That being said, I think the first order of business for any new Secretary General will not be about the political machinations of domestic Lebanese politics. They are on the cusp of, and I would argue at the beginning of, a wide open war that could and now looks much more likely to proceed to a far more violent regional war. In some ways, this regional war has already happened many months ago, but it looks set to accelerate dramatically. So I think the first order of business is there will be a wartime Secretary General of Hezbollah. They are at war, and they have entered an open war period, it looks like, which is fundamentally different from the period that preceded it, where Hezbollah has to worry about the different political constituencies in Lebanon, its own supportive constituencies and milieus, its enemies in Lebanon, its enemies in the near abroad and internationally. I think that right now they are in immediate wartime mode, and that is where we are going, unfortunately.
Stephen, a few hours before the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was at the United Nations delivering a speech where he was very defiant, vowing to clamp down on Hamas and Hezbollah. Was he doing this on purpose, knowing that the Americans are going to be busy with the elections, and therefore he sees the opportunity for him to continue and to finish what he has started?
Well, if the Biden administration was concerned about the elections, they would finally pressure Israel to stop the war on Gaza, which would stop the war in Lebanon, because the U.S. support for these wars are very unpopular in the United States. Many people are blaming the Biden administration and Vice President Harris, by extension. And there are many Democratic-leaning voters, young people, progressives, Arab Americans, Muslims, who are threatening to not vote or vote third party rather than vote for a candidate whom they associate with genocide. I mean, there's some hints that Vice President Harris, as president, would be tougher on Israel than Biden has. Indeed, we've seen previous presidents, Reagan, and stopped Israel from continuing its offensive in Beirut back in 1982. Obama twice forced Israel to suspend its attacks on Gaza. Presidents do have that power. Biden has refused to do it. And so that's gotten a lot of anger. And I think Netanyahu's speech, as disingenuous as it was on so many levels, was largely towards an American audience, to basically try to justify this continued war and to lessen the pressure that the Biden administration and Congress is beginning to hear, from key constituencies in the United States.
Gideon, are the political elite, Netanyahu in particular, and the army, on the same page about how to move next? Are we likely to see a ground invasion?
They are not on the same page, and they were even not on the same page before this operation. But somehow, until now, they always find the same page, at least for concrete operations. I think none of them, neither the army nor Netanyahu, want to put an end to the war now. And I'm afraid that both will support a ground operation, which might be the next challenge, the next very dangerous challenge in the development of this war. Because if Hezbollah will really launch rockets now in the coming days in a meaningful quantity on Israel, Israel will say we have to go in. There will be a pressure on the decision makers to go in, and then we face a ground operation, and then again it's a new game, because this will really get complicated inevitably, almost inevitably, because once the IDF will be inside Lebanon, and it was many times before, then there will be quite an advantage to Hezbollah forces who know the ground, who are quite well equipped with army, with weapons, much more than Hamas, obviously. And look, they are 1 year in Gaza and they didn't achieve anything. In Lebanon, it will be much more complicated. So I think, to sum up, both the army and Netanyahu are ready for a ground operation, and those are very bad news.
Okay. Nicholas, there are people who say now in Lebanon that what is happening now is totally different to what happened in 2006. And for Hezbollah to be able to move forward and reinvent itself in the upcoming days, weeks or months, it has to understand that there needs to be a political consensus which never existed over the last 20 years or 25 years in Lebanon. Do you think they will be willing this time to offer some concessions to their key challengers in Lebanon?
This question is very difficult to unpack because of the uncertainty of this next period. If, as Gideon Levy has said, it's possible the IDF and the political leadership are on the same page and that there may be a ground invasion in the coming period, this is fundamentally different. This is a question of occupation, invasion, and I think that the whole calculus of different Lebanese political parties shifts. The relationship with Hezbollah shifts. There's some concern or some hope in some quarters that some Lebanese sides may find common cause with the Israelis. all of this is real speculation, but it's all up for consideration because there are so many unknowns in this next period. The one thing that seems certain, though, is that things will get markedly worse. Lebanese internal politics will probably get markedly worse, more fractious, more dangerous. And the situation of civilians in Lebanon, certainly, but also likely within Israel, is also going to materially worsen. So, I don't really see how Hezbollah can even reasonably calculate its next steps domestically to try to shore up X, Y, and Z. I think, again, we are at a major turning point, perhaps the greatest one in the last 11 and a half months, and that these days and weeks could bring many scenarios, but most of them are quite awful.
Stephen, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin warned that an all-out war between Lebanese Hezbollah and Israel would be devastating for both Lebanon and Israel. Do you think the Americans still have any sort of political leverage that they can pull to try to contain the situation from further spinning out of control?
Well, they have considerable leverage, but they have chosen not to do it. As I mentioned, both Reagan and Obama have been able to pressure Israel to stop its wars in the past. But Biden, against the desires of Secretary of Defense Austin, of CIA Director Burns, and reportedly Vice President Harris as well, has somehow believed that this kind of persuasion would be enough to curb Netanyahu. And it's very, at least he's trying, at least he's saying they should not continue. Back in 2006, it was the Bush administration that goaded Israel on against the better judgment of their general staff to launch this ground invasion. And it's stunning that Israel's even thinking about this, given what happened in 2006. Their very own Winogrand Commission roundly criticized the Israeli authorities for such a foolish operation. I mean, anybody who's been to southern Lebanon, as I have, just the terrain itself is very, very challenging for any kind of offensive military operation like that. And Hezbollah has all these tunnels and elaborate defensive systems. I mean, it would be a lot of Israelis would die. I mean, in 2006, Hezbollah was the first Arab force to have a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of military casualties, even though, of course, the civilian casualties on the Lebanese was much bigger.
Well, unfortunately, I have to leave it there. Gideon, Levy, Stephen, Zunes, and Nicholas, now I really appreciate your insight. Looking forward to talking to you in the near future. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.